Good afternoon and welcome to Pittsburgh City Council's post agenda regarding the American Rescue Plan on July 6th. And we are joined today by council members, I can't see, Anthony Coghill, Councilwoman Gross, Councilman Kraus, Councilman Wilson. I want to make sure that I'm not missing anyone. And Councilman Lavelle, who's actually our finance chair, who allows me to chair this meeting. And if other members join us as we go on, I'll announce their arrival. And with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Chief of Staff Dan Gilman for Mayor Peduto, who's going to kick us off on this informational meeting. Thank you for joining us, Chief of Staff Gilman.
Thank you, Madam President. It's my pleasure. Good afternoon, council members. I'm joined today by Kevin Paulus, who's our Director of the Office of Management and Budget, Patrick Cornell, who's our Assistant Director of O&B for Operating Budgets, Majestic Lane, who is Deputy Chief of Staff and Chief Equity Officer for the city, and Lindsay Powell, who's the Assistant Chief of Staff and Head of our Policy Shop in the Mayor's Office. If Council is okay, I will go through a very brief conversation, try to keep it to about 5 minutes, mostly for highlights for the public. This is all information you have through the legislation and press. It is not new info, but just for the viewing public to set the table. And then, of course, just open it up to you, Madam President, to run in terms of question and answer. Kevin and Patrick are here really to get into the details of questions about the federal statute and the legislation and rules that have been promulgated around it and legalities of spending and budgeting practices. Chiefs Lane and Powell are the two main points for the vast majority of the programmatic efforts, with the few exception of there are some infrastructure projects that would fall under Director Ricks or Director Hornstein who are not with us. I doubt that's where most of the council questions are, but certainly if you do have them, we will make sure those get answered and people can certainly be at the budget here or at the council hearing when these are considered. So the city of Pittsburgh is receiving $335 million in federal American Rescue Plan dollars. We received that money from the federal government in two tranches of $167.5 million. We have received the first segment. It is in our bank account. The second one will come in 2022. Legally, the spending that we have to put these in go into several categories. One is lost revenue. Of course, that's basically the heart of the American Rescue Plan local government effort was recognition of city government, county government, state government, and their related authorities and the loss of revenue from lower tax dollars across the board. Here in Pittsburgh, as you all know well, some of the hardest hit areas include things like parking meter revenue, parking tax, amusement tax with the loss of events. We ended up doing a bit better in terms of wage and property than we were fearful at times, and thankfully starting to see economic recovery, but we still had significant revenue shortfalls, and there also is a federal breakdown of how you can calculate losses as well. Community public safety is another legal category for spending. Community health, negative economic impact, broadband infrastructure, water infrastructure, and then administrative overhead. So for us, I'm going to start with the city side, and that is City of Pittsburgh budgeting issues. Our plan can fall into a couple of categories. One is restoring positions that were cut or frozen, the vacant positions from the budget. The second are some new positions or swaps that we're doing while reopening the budget. The third is non-personnel costs, and then the fourth is fleet operations. I will note that in addition, we will be spending $5.2 million to restore the 3% annual cost of living adjustment that non-union employees traditionally received that did not occur in 2021. All union employees received their 2021 raises in line with their with their collective bargaining agreement. Non-union salaries were frozen across the board, so we will restore that cost up front. On the position side, we are proposing to council to restore 71% of the vacant positions that we eliminated from the 2021 budget. The other 29% are positions that after review, we realize that we think we can either survive without They stood vacant forever and just sat on the books as an expenditure that was not realistic, at least in today's climate, that can always be restored in the future, or that we're swapping out for a different position, though that is only a few of those. We can certainly get you the breakdown. Additionally, I will not go through all 129 positions, but some highlights based off key areas. We're putting back 10 crossing guards into the budget, adding putting back, I should say, 2 remittance technicians. These are employees in the Department of Finance directly related to the processing of tax payments. 4 positions in DOMI that are either planning or engineers. 8 within facilities. These are our union plumbers, carpenters, electricians, building operators. A critical area we've been making a huge investment and will even more, and we need to get those positions back. 22 positions within public works operations. These are largely laborers. I believe there's a couple of drivers in there as well, but these are the men and women in the field in operations every day. So this is parks maintenance, snow maintenance, pothole patching, the basic operations of our streets. And then we are putting back 8 rec employees. That's 7 rec leaders and a rec center director back into the budget, especially as we continue to invest in rec centers in this, as well as some upcoming things in the budget, where we'll be talking potentially even about new rec centers in the city of Pittsburgh. The second category are swaps. These are positions where directors have asked, can I switch out a senior talent acquisition coordinator for a talent acquisition coordinator, things like that. These are generally mostly budget neutral with a few budgetary impacts that you can see. The only ones I'll really highlight for you in particular is within the Commission on Human Relations, per the director's request, we are restoring a full-time position that the previous director had made part-time, and that is directly related to their request for assistance with the eviction moratorium. And we actually have already done that. That position has already been made full-time. This is doing the paperwork for the advance that we created for the eviction moratorium purposes. So we're honoring that request from CHR. We're adding 1 new assistant solicitor where we've really felt the need, particularly with the amount of municipal legislation coming through, council and the administration and the number of contracts, trying to beef that up. In one position that I will highlight a little selfishly, but I know it relates to some, we are putting in a basically a lease and asset manager. And that's one person who really specializes in all of these leases we have at our senior centers, our rec centers, whether we're leasing space or we lease out space to organizations. Think Boys and Girls Club building in Lawrenceville, or the West End Healthy Active Living Center. This kind of gets thrown around between law, public works, and finance, and we really thought it was important that basically the city have one person whose job it is to manage these positions. The next category is the non-personnel items. For the public, these are all of the general operating costs that are not direct personnel costs. So it can be everything as small as the line item for where we buy our paper, up to very significant costs like DPW facilities or ELA vehicle purchases, et cetera. So for this is a total of $20 million over the 4 years. 55% of that $20 million is going back to DPW restoring operation costs. Significant chunk is in Assistant Director Hornstein's world. In the facilities, this is where we pay many of the natural things. When you just call and say, hey, the roof is leaking at Warrington Rec, this is the money that does that. So it's not a special capital up cost. This is general how we maintain our fields, replace fencing at a Little League field when it breaks, things like that. So that is 55% of the money. Another 20% is restoring cuts to ELA. That is our equipment leasing authority. That's our vehicle purchases. And I'll get back to that in a minute. And then 15% is some critical technology needs within innovation and performance, both related to recognition of costs due to COVID and also security costs and back to work costs. So combined, those three are about 90% of the non-personnel. So what we didn't bring back in full numbers, we did in some, of course, but we really pushed our departments hard on some of those costs that, quite frankly, have been in the budget for 40 years and just gone up 3% every year. Whether that's, the water bill, the the food line item for meetings, your purchasing, things like that. We really look to see how much the world has changed due to COVID and cut those numbers rather than just going back to previous levels. The fourth category, as I mentioned, is the ELA, the Equipment Leasing Authority. This comes out to about $13.7 million. And again, we can get you the full list if you don't see it in your legislative packet, but I really will just highlight two areas. One is some critical purchase of fire equipment. We'll be buying three aerial fire trucks and 2 pumpers. So over 2 years, 5 fire pieces of apparatus, which are in critical and dire need in the city. And basically the entire rest of the purchases are electric. And by the way, we are starting to look at electric fire trucks. We're not quite ready for prime time, but we are moving and looking to pilot with some other cities to look at those. But other than that, the vehicles are electric. So it's the motor pool, pickup trucks within Public Works and Parks and Rec, our PLI inspector vehicles, our DOMI inspector and DOMI employees, what our planners drive to sites. Also, for the first time, we'll be buying electric recycling packers, moving to that. And with this ARP spending plan of vehicle purchasing, we will be more or less at 100% electric of what I'll call non-specialized equipment. So that's not yet big 2-ton dump trucks for snow. That's not yet ambulances and police cars. But if you think about the general 4-door fleet of the city, we will be all electric. And in these numbers, by the way, does include the electric infrastructure that we know needs to go with it for a reliable fleet. This is, I believe, a tremendous accomplishment and credit to City Council with helping prioritizing these dollars with our climate action. The next area I'll just run through are really the key line items in the ARP plan. And after that, I'll stop and turn it back over to Council. We'll be putting $2 million into community public safety facilities. This money is not all 100% determined. Some of it is still in negotiation phase. Of course, will all come through Council. I can tell you the first one, though, is the Zone 3 substation in Councilman Krause's district related to the south side and looking to restore the old Zone 3 on 18th Street as a substation for our south side operations. There will be some flexibility there. There are some leases we need to get out of in the next 12 months in moving facilities around. We also will be looking to move some facilities that will allow us to open a new recreation center and senior center in Council President Cale Smith's district that's currently housing some public safety operations in that line. The second is $10 million for the Office of Community Health and Safety. This is our co-responder model, right now often referred to as the AHN co-responder model, as Allegheny Health Network and Dan Pelka lead that effort. That was an RFP. Of course, you don't know what the future holds, but this $10 million will allow that co-responder model to be 24/7 in all 6 police zones citywide, and really putting into full effect through 2023 funding to make sure that we have a future thinking co-responder model around harm reduction, mental health, poverty, homelessness. This ties into much of the great work that Laura Dragowski and her team are doing. There are also positions within this reopener. They're not funded with ARP dollars because they come out of a trust fund, but through the budget opener, additional hiring of staff for her to really continue to build out the critical work that OCHS is doing. I hope some of you saw a press release from us today on our new neighborhood safety academy partnership with Staunton Farm Foundation that she's running. We're really proud of that work, and this will take it to the next level. We're putting $6 million into the land maintenance in the city. This is through the 3 taxing body trust fund. The critical point I'll point out for this work is, of course, the amount of lots that we all know need to be cut in our neighborhoods, but we see this more as a workforce development effort. How do you employ and partner with small businesses and create job opportunities for young people to earn a living and start to eliminate the blight in our neighborhoods? We've started that work. This $6 million will help advance it. Next is our rec centers. I will run through. There's one in each of your districts. In District 1, it's Cowley Rec Center. In District 2, Thaddeus Stevens School. District 3 is McKinley. District 4 is Phillips. District 5 is the Hazelwood Senior Center. District 6 is Jefferson Rec. District 7 and Robert E. Williams. District 6 has 2. District 7 is the West Penn Rec Center. District 8 is the Marshall Mansion, and District 9 is the Paulson Rec Center. These dollars will both fix the fundamental structures at these facilities that are much needed, everything from leaking roofs to HVAC system improvements to new floors to remediation of lead paint and asbestos. We'll also build out technology hubs in every center as our Rec to Tech initiative and falls under the ARP's broadband initiative to close the gap on the digital divide and build digital equity training within our centers across the city. The next number is $12 million for city streetlights. The city, through city council support, is doing a transition to LED streetlights. The RFP is actively in the field as we speak. The RFP was to replace 35,000 streetlights in the city with LED lights. Mayor Peduto stressed very clearly up front that if we just switch one light for one light, he would consider that a failure if we didn't address the equity component. Under the leadership of Domi, INP, and Chief Lane, we did do a light equity analysis looking across the city, and you will not be surprised that there is direct correlations to economic conditions in neighborhoods. This $12 million will allow us to put in 8,000 new LED lights. So instead of 35,000, we'll be doing 43, directly placing anywhere in our map where we have a pole without a light that shows a gap in equity. So this wouldn't be placing new poles, and it's not placing a light on every pole, to be very clear. But within the analysis where our light equity study said this neighborhood is underlit or this street is underlit and there's already a pole there, we had 8,000 of those locations that this will fund. Next is Davis Avenue Bridge. We'll fully fund the new bike ped bridge that connects Brighton Heights in Riverview Park in Councilman Wilson's district. We had already significant funding in place. This closes that funding line item. Same thing also, actually both Councilman Wilson and Councilman Lavelle, is the North Avenue Streetscape Safety and Signal. This takes North Avenue through the core of the north side, basically from Manchester all the way to 279, and does everything from replaces all of the lights with modern lights with pedestrian countdown signals, bump outs, stormwater infrastructure, pedestrian enhancements, plus streetscape improvements. There's $1 million for Councilman O'Connor's district for Irvine Street sidewalks. This is a stretch of Irvine through Hazelwood that has no sidewalks. It's been a top priority of the Hazelwood community in this administration. We got a grant that funded a piece of it, and we will close out the funding to be able to complete that project immediately. Funding for the Fraser Street steps in South Oakland, funding the gap on the new 4th Division to service the South Hills and Public Works. We saw significant increase in costs for that project due to COVID, in construction costs rising from the time we broke ground to today. This will fully fund that gap and allow construction to continue. And then 2 important ones to note, the Hill District corridor enhancements in the citywide step project. These are both earmarks within the federal transportation and infrastructure bill that Congressman Doyle has put in. We want them shovel ready. So this funding will actually fund the engineering and design for these projects. So then when the federal government comes in with the infrastructure bill, we are literally shovel ready. The 30% design drawings are done, and we can go fully funded projects straight to implementation in partnership with the federal government. A small line, but I think an important one to note, is the next one, which is $100,000 for a new Casa San Jose partnership around immigration representation. We've been working with Casa San Jose and the Welcoming Pittsburgh initiative to look at ways to provide greater legal assistance to residents of Pittsburgh facing immigration hearings. And this provides some funding to match some outside funding to try to launch a partnership project here in the city with Casa San Jose. 2.8 million, that's the Penn Circle conversion. This is the very last stretch of Penn Circle that has not been turned back two-way since the failure of 1950s urban planning. This is the Euclid section. Again, we thought it was fully funded. COVID costs created a huge gap in construction costs. This closes that gap financing. 1600 Broadway in Beachview. This is putting $1 million. That's a facility we own through the URA. We have not been able to get a tenant for. We are in negotiations potentially with the tenant. This could be huge for that effort. Even if that falls through, this still allows the URA to improve the building and get it back as a vibrant part of the Beachview Business District. Next is $1 million for each of our avenues of hope across the city. We then have $2 million for the Lexington Technology Center / Homewood development. This is an affordable housing mixed-use development that spans the busway between Homewood and North Point Breeze. $1 million for the Jasmine Nairi campus in Sheridan in Council President Cale Smith's district. $2 million for the Gladstone School affordable housing development in Hazelwood and Councilman O'Connor's district. This is another project that found a significant gap from COVID costs. This allows it to go forward immediately, a top priority of Hazelwood. The next line, $3.5 million. This will allow us to take URA grants made during, URA loans made during COVID to small business owners and forgive those loans without creating a hole in the URA budget, but supports all of our small businesses that relied on us to help get through some of their COVID costs. Next are a number of housing initiatives at the URA. First is about $21.5 million for an initiative known as Own PGH. This is to help low to moderate income residents buy a home in the city of Pittsburgh through different means. This is everything from closing cost assistance to rehabilitation assistance to land acquisition to building costs of new homes. But this is a home ownership initiative for LMI families in the city of Pittsburgh. The next line item is $5 million to protect existing affordable housing. This will create a new fund at the URA with flexibility. Many of you remember things like Homewood Bethesda in Homewood, most recently in Council President's District, it's just in transition, but different sites that are critical to our affordable housing needs and usually deed restrictions, price out, ownership changes, and we're scrambling to try to keep that as affordable housing. This will actually create a fund with flexibility for the URA to properly respond to those needs. The next is $5 million for Community Land Trust. We have several in the city of Pittsburgh. OPDC has been doing work, and City of Bridges has been doing fantastic work in Polish Hill, in Lawrenceville, about to start in Hazelwood. This will give the URA money to partner with those organizations for this, what we believe is a very successful model that has worked. Next is $10 million for the homeowner utility program. This again is owned at existing homeowners in the city who are low to moderate income. In the city, if you look at costs in the affordability crisis, the two areas where we are the most standard deviations away from the national averages are utility costs and transportation costs. So this looks to address the utility costs by helping existing homeowners do everything from replace windows, insulation, roof replacement, as well as sustainability improvements. So whether that's going solar, stormwater costs to mitigate water and sewer fees, et cetera, but aimed really at the growing impact that utilities have on our affordability. The next item is $10 million for the land bank. I believe this is one that might be one of the more questioned out there. And what I'll say is this, we have not done what we needed to do at the land bank. Councilwoman Gross, I think this was her first bill when she joined a number of years ago and championed it. The city has not delivered, but we still believe there is absolutely 100% critical need. We have hired an outstanding new manager from New York City who has moved here to take over day-to-day operations. We've taken the land bank and moved it to the URA under Diamante Walker's fantastic leadership. Lindsay Powell has been doing endless work on the policy side with finance to address it. We have Wayne Fontana, who's introduced amendment to MICDL legislation in Harrisburg that we desperately need. Things are really coming together, and we believe this $10 million will really set up the city to see the land bank work in the next several years under a new administration. This would be $3 million this year and $2 million each year through the term of this. Next is a $2 million fund for artists, a category that of residents and business owners who felt a particular struggle during COVID with stages and performance spaces being closed. We'll be creating a program that creates vibrancy in our community and addresses the economic crisis for artists. So this would be everything from hiring, and when I say artist, I'm talking performance art, musical art, using art in the loosest of definitions to perform at our farmers markets, our public spaces, our senior centers, our rec centers, bringing special events with good paying jobs for artists to neighborhoods that don't currently necessarily have, say, a movie night or a Bach, Beethoven, and brunch, or I believe Highland Park has jazz at the Reservoir. How do you take that model, hire more artists, put money in their pockets, and bring vibrancy to our neighborhoods? We have $1 million for streeteries. These are the extended restaurant spaces that took over parking lanes. Many of them, of course, were done quickly and with city bicycle rack, which we are happy to do, and I commend the city for flexibility. They're not the most beautiful in all cases, and so we're going to do $1 million in grants to small businesses to take those and beautify them. The corner of Penn and 10th right now, which I think looks really nice and done well, and what that can be in neighborhoods across the city. Next up is lead. There's $20 million in lead. I will say this is a little bit of a placeholder, not the 20 million, but this will do both expediting lead light replacement for lead in water at PWSA and a new initiative to address lead in paint in partnership with Women for a Healthy Environment. We don't yet know the exact split of that 20 and how we're going to do it. That will come to council as an amendment to this. We're working with some council members and Women for a Healthy Environment on the best way to do that. But the money is there to address lead in both water and paint in this line item. And then the last one is guaranteed basic income. This is $2.5 million. This is our pilot initiative to take Black women who earn under 50% AMI and have gone through City Financial Empowerment Center training and provide them $500 a month for 2 years to show the federal government and states, but the federal government, that guaranteed basic income does work. We're now over 30 mayors and cities across the country doing GBI pilots. The vast majority, or I shouldn't say that, many are using ARP money to do this. The success out of Stockton so far in the research being done by the University of Pennsylvania and the University of Tennessee is showing that this works. And we believe we can be an integral part of that national study. This matches $600,000 we've already received in grant, fully funds the pilot for 2 years, and will be direct. This is the money that goes directly to Black women in Pittsburgh who will be part of the pilot. I know people are concerned that this money goes through one PGH. I understand and hear that concern. I would just note that under state law, we are prohibited from making direct payments to individuals in that manner. And so it has to go through a 501c3 partner by state law. But this is not money to fund one PGH. This is money to fund the Black women in the program through the 501c3 partnership. So with that, Madam President, I will stop and turn it back over to you.
Thank you very much for that very informative presentation. And I'm going to start with Councilman Lavelle because he chairs Finance and Law, and then we'll go from there. Councilman Lavelle, do you have anything?
No, I'm actually driving. I apologize.
Okay, no, I apologize. Okay,
no worries.
Thank you. Thank you. And anything from any other members?
Madam President, yeah.
Councilman Kraus, please.
Yeah, thank you. So thanks everybody for being here today. I know this is a little bit dry because, we're really talking about, budget allocations here, but just a couple things that I heard during the Chief Gilman's presentation. I just want to make certain that I have a full understanding. So Chief Gilman, can you direct me to the allocation which will assist us with processing tax payments? I know you've heard this, council members have all heard it too. Councilman Gross is shaking her head. My check hasn't cleared yet. I don't want people saying, why hasn't the councilman paid his taxes? When I wrote the check. So can you show me the allocation that will help us to ultimately resolve processing tax payment?
Sure. So I guess a couple comments. The answer is this would be under positions restored. So
under city operating.
Yes, exactly. And under finance department in the breakdown of positions, there's two remittance remittance specialists. So that's the line item you would see in your ARP plan. I will note, of course, being by the time council passes this, the jobs are created, posted, hired. I don't want to give a false hope that this causes an instantaneous. We will be looking at September to October before people are in these positions trained and working. So it certainly helps for future years, but I don't want to give false hope that we're out here saying that this money solves the immediate challenge we've had this year in collection.
Will you say that again, please? Because it is important for constituency to hear that simply because, we live in this text message and email world, and that just because council has allocated doesn't mean instant remediation, but that it will take some time, but we will get there.
Correct. And then I will note for next year, you'll have half as many tax payments because the parks tax and city tax will be one bill. And we'll be able to have more people working at once, both because we won't have COVID safety restrictions in place and we'll have more employees. So I really don't think we'll have any issue next year with collection and processing, even if council didn't change anything. And I know council is a task force looking at potential changes, but even without, I think this was a very, very unfortunate one-time anomaly, but this will help fill those positions and get finance back at the staffing levels they need.
Can you talk a little bit more, please, about the restoration that's going to take place within the Department of Public Works? I know some of it is around staffing levels to make certain that we meet critical need for delivering services, but then there's also restoration to necessary vehicles that will take place that are needed within the Department of Public Works, but that will be expenditures through the Equipment Leasing Authority. So could you just sort of talk a little bit more about that?
Sure, there's a number of impacts here. So the first is restoration of positions that were frozen and then ultimately eliminated that were vacant. This includes everything from 22 people within operations. Those are the men and women in the streets. On top of that, it's restoring seasonal laborers, which is something we've always had in the past and we don't have this year. One of the reasons you're hearing more concerns, particularly in our parks, about growth is we don't have our seasonal laborers we always have. 8 people within facilities. These are our construction employees. These are our plumbers, our electricians, our metal workers, our building operating engineers, etc. Plus investment in vehicles, plus some transition of positions. Some areas we're lowering admin, put more in the field. Some areas we're swapping to provide more administrative support to somebody that needs it. Some places we're investing in we're growing the city by one supervisor. We're adding a new supervisor. So traditionally within the operation, the city has only had a supervisor at each division across the city. We're actually creating kind of a special initiative supervisor that will do things like clean and lean, citywide snow observation, our city cuts programs, anything, our garbage litter can in business district crews, anything operation that crosses all divisions and doesn't know division boundary lines will be under their supervision. So we thought that was a critical area where sometimes things fall through the cracks in our division structure.
So, and I think it's important at this juncture to also stress that allocations don't mean immediate hire and immediate remediation of some experienced problems. Do we know? I know many businesses are suffering a worker shortage. Do we know that we have applications or seeking application for competent or people that have capacity to fill these positions?
That's a great question, Councilman. It depends on the position. We don't post and seek applicants if a real position to hire is not there. We don't keep lines per se. Yeah. Something that doesn't exist. So some of these we don't know. In other cases, we always have a list, like our laborers or our driver lists. Those are constant 365 lists with our unions. And we do know we have people on some of those lists. But we also know, as I said, historically, how hard we've had a time attracting candidates for school crossing guard over the years, or how hard it is to recruit plumbers. We have struggled mightily to get anyone to apply to be a plumber. And I expect those challenges to only be worse during this current era. It's going to take a lot of work on many different parts of the administration to recruit and attract candidates. And there's many different reasons why these things are challenging. It is not a simple one-word answer. But of course, in many of these things, the private sector economy is doing very well. And city jobs, the salary across the board, even up to the highest levels, don't keep up. I'll pick an extreme example, but a former assistant chief of police here in Pittsburgh, Larry Scarrato, was just named chief of police in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. The public salary is double what Chief Schubert makes for a department that's a third the size. That's true for plumbers, electricians, laborers, lawyers, engineers, planners. It's a constant challenge the city has, and one that we'd all love to address, both because we want to pay our employees better and what they deserve and earn, but also to recruit. And the reality is we're already, every year very dangerously balancing a budget with the right legally required amount in savings that council put in place as we left Act 47. And these are the tough decisions council and administration have to make in every budget. We've tried to do it. We've raised a lot of salaries in Mayor Peduto's last 4 years. We've reached, since I took over in this job in 4 years, we've reached a new union contract with every single union in the city in my 3.5 years, all of which had significant increases in raises and other costs. And we've been trying to do it year by year through different departments for the non-union personnel as well.
Yeah, and I personally, and I believe the council large applauds the administration for the advances that we have made in being more competitive in the job market. We have some way to go. And I think what you're going to hear in this budget season is a fulsome discussion by council members about how we can perhaps put out a 5-year plan to become more competitive in the job market, and to be able to attract the best and the brightest, to be able to do the work that needs to be done and serve our constituency with the quality of personnel that they deserve. And so I think that you're going to hear a lot of that in this year's budget discussion about how we can do better by city employees and ultimately attract the best and the brightest that we can. And I know that won't happen overnight, and that's why I'm suggesting perhaps it is something along the lines of a 5-year plan of how we can graduate to do things better than that. I have a couple more things, if that's okay, Madam President. Can I? Yeah. So to talk a little bit about the substation in the south side, I don't want to go into you and I appreciate your time this morning. We had, great discussion about the COVID restrictions being lifted and how people are returning, and perhaps in greater numbers than we had anticipated. We're experiencing, our share of problems, and appreciate your help and support in helping us to rectify that, along with Director Hisrich and our zone commander, Chief Schubert, and Allison Harnden. But can you talk a little bit about the reopening of the substation, not the particulars of it, but the funding of it? Do we have a somewhat reasonable or realistic bid of what we think it's going to take to reopen the substation?
The answer is I would really refer you to Chris Hornstein to get an affirmative answer. I will say that we didn't pick this number out of the blue. We asked Director Hornstein what he thought it would cost and put that in. So my short answer would be yes, this wasn't a made up number, but in terms of how firm that is, at the level of analysis, have they done all the sampling on, different things that need to be done? I'm not sure the answer, but this wasn't a nice round number that Dan picked off the top of his head. This came from our facilities.
Yeah, and I certainly didn't mean to suggest that by any means. The building has its complications and has for a number of years, which is one of the reasons why the building was, abandoned, if you will. But I know you believe how critical that the reopening of that is, and I know constituency here believe how critical that the commitment to reopening that is. And as you and I have talked many times, when Mayor Peduto was then Councilman Peduto, and you were serving as his chief of staff, every year that we did our 5-year plan for recovery through under 47, it was always in that 47 plan to open that station. So this is not a new idea that we just happen to have because there happens to be money. There's probably a solid 10-year history in the desire to get the station up and running again. So I appreciate your commitment to that. Can we talk a little bit about the social service aspects of expanding the work that we're doing through the Office of Health and Community Services? I hope I said that right, and AHN and Laura Dragowski, and to expand that to all the zones. You and I have had ample conversation about how critical that is, especially in District 3 and the Zone 3 police. But can you also, if you're able, speak a little bit about the responsibility that the county has to assist in balancing the funds that are expended from the city, and a way to sort of partner that funding with county to effectuate better outcomes, because a large portion of social services, as we all know, lie within the county. So can you talk a little bit about, are there communications along that line?
Oh, absolutely. And we have a really strong partnership with the new director of DHS at the county, Aaron Dalton, who's been there for many years and is a fantastic leader for that organization, in working with them on allocations they have through federal efforts. Things like the new homeless shelter on 2nd Avenue is a great partnership between the city and county. I think we'll have some exciting announcements in the coming, I'd like to say weeks, if I can be optimistic. Maybe that becomes months and during some time, around diversion and our diversion efforts citywide. That has been a great partnership, not only with the county, but with other municipalities. So the county is a critical partner. DHS is, of course, the leading social service provider. But when you look around the country at the best models, and certainly I would say we were ahead of our times with the work Laura Dragowski was doing in the mayor's office, but admittedly was one person. Yeah. And a number of the incidents and murders around the country, George Floyd at the top of the list, but others have really highlighted the question of who responds to what crisis and what training do they receive and what is the appropriate intervention. We, of course, have always had Resolve in Allegheny County and different functions that are out there, but it's clear that cities themselves, whether or not they run the human service agency, need to have a role in that. And this co-responder model is working fantastically so far. We're seeing great success in who we're partnering, who we're hiring. The other build out, and I, if I may encourage council to maybe do a post agenda with Laura and her team on what they're doing so she can give much better details. We've hired some incredible people, including the head of the social work program at Carlow University to run our social worker efforts, really attracting top-notch and getting national attention for it. This money will really set it up for the next 2 years, I would say, between this and the reopener money coming from the trust fund, that OCHS can, I don't know how to say it without sounding way too cheesy and cliche, they'll get their wings and spread them and fly. In these 2 years, and then that will allow council in the next administration to really then analyze what direction without worrying about, do we have enough money for tomorrow? This kind of provides that security to then take the time, do the data analysis, track your numbers, look at calls for service, all the things I know you'll do, and then decide what the future is 2 years from now or 18 months from now.
So, Chief Gilman, I suspect there'll be two things you'll take away from the relationship you and I have had on council. I can see you smiling already. One of them, I have to say that I am the common denominator in all my relationships. And number two, we plan to manage success and we police failure. And this idea that every situation it's appropriate to send an officer in with a gun. Hopefully, if anything has come out of the protest of the summer, that we have learned loud and clear that there are better ways to respond to any number of different situations, and that this idea that if we fail to plan and manage as administrators and elected leaders, and systems fail, that we just hand it off to police officers, and that's just simply no longer the way that we do things. And and I applaud protesters, and I applaud the administration for hearing loud and clear that we can and will do better, and we will put systems in place to make certain that we respond to situations accurately and effectively, and that not every situation needs to have a police officer with a gun respond. A couple other things I'd like to talk about, if I could, please. We talked a little bit about the land bank. There is some reservation. I've expressed with you some of my reservation about putting additional monies into the land bank. I'll continue to have those conversations with you. I'll continue to have those conversations with council members, and anxious to hear what the public at large has to say in the 2 public hearings that will be scheduled to talk about additional funding into the land bank. But that is something that I would like to explore deeper with you. I won't take up time here to do, because I know other members wish to have audience with you as well. But I just wanted to be honest and upfront that is the one point where I do have some reservation.
And if I may,
Sure.
I'll respect not to get into it now. I would encourage, as this conversation takes place, that we have Lindsay Powell at the table as she's an expert.
Sure.
The only thing I will just say is I understand and share on a times 10 your frustration with where the land bank is. But I strongly, strongly believe we do not give up on it. This model works in Pennsylvania and around the country. We haven't done it right, but money and legislation can change that. I still believe it is the right model for Pittsburgh and for Blight in our neighborhoods as a tool in the toolbox, not the only tool. And I'd strongly encourage council to not give up and to really give this new leadership team the chance to show that it can work.
Yeah, and I know Chief Powell's on the call here now. I don't want to take the time here, but I would love to set up a time with you directly where you and I can, have a much more rounded conversation about new leadership, how it is housed in URA now, and the hope for a brighter tomorrow, if you will. And I'll feel better about allocating dollars, but I'm just not there yet. But I'd appreciate your time, Director Powell, if we could do that. The urgency of our rec centers is another a really important point. I appreciate that there's funding going into our rec centers. I don't know if you've had an opportunity to get up to McKinley yet. I know you do get up there, and I know you meet with Richard Carrington often. What they are doing at McKinley Rec right now is anything short of outstanding. I was able to be privy to be at McKinley Rec for the first day of the summer programming, and it was a flashback to my youth to just see hundreds of kids active and programmed and cared for and fed and engaged in a wonderful social situation, and they're doing great, amazing work at McKinley Rec. And the one limitation we have there is the structure. And you and I have talked about this. I appreciate it. My full support is the money being allocated to the rec centers, but the instant that these monies are passed, I'm going to be asking for us to put out RFPs for contracts to make certain that roof is repaired as quickly as we can humanly possibly do it. And then the last thing I'd really like to say is I know that there has been some question of council members about whether or not it is appropriate to spend the funding now. I know we have a new administration ultimately coming in, regardless of who the public decides to elect in November to come in and be a new administration. I do want to say, and I don't want to pull any punches, that this mayor, this administration, and this council saw everything about this pandemic. We lived the pandemic and everything about it and how it affected the operations of city government, the weight and the pressure that I know it put on the mayor to be able to lead us through this incredibly difficult time, the administration that stepped up to do the work that needed to be done under incredibly difficult situations, and this city council who shone through this process unlike anything that I've ever seen. And I've seen this council perform great things, but this council stood up, strapped on their big boy pants, and met the critical need that was necessary to deliver for the constituency that we represent. And so if anyone has an intimate and full knowledge of impact and effect that COVID has had on the people we represent, it is this mayor, his administration, and this council. And I am beyond comfortable with the council, this mayor and this administration allocating these dollars, these necessary dollars now when need is so very critical. So it's just important that I say that and put that out there. And Madam President, I took a whole lot of time, but I had a lot to say. And everyone that's here, I appreciate that you allowed me to do that. And Chief Gilman and the administrators that are here, thank you very much for coming before council. This is an incredibly important allocation of funds, and it deserves due diligence, and it deserves public input, which, thank you, Madam President, we will begin gathering on Saturday morning and next Monday night. So.
Madam President, if I may, Councilman, thank you for your comments. I think there's 4 really important points to make on that. Number one, we all lobbied, and we being everyone on this call, but a much broader we, for the American Rescue Plan, because the need of American families was urgent, it was severe, and the economy and our families needed it. I think it would be disingenuous and dangerous to hold off on spending on some of those critical areas for a year when you're talking about some of the most imminent needs that are out there. The second is, remember, we have to spend this money in 4 years, not allocate, but spend. If we lose one of those 4 years, I think the city would have a hard time spending some of that. If you assume a new mayor would get in, analyze, present a plan, go to council, etc. The third is, of course, the next mayor has every right to change it. We don't file this plan with the federal government. It is not locked in. The next mayor would have every right, just like they do with the budget, to come to council. And I can guarantee you they'll need to. I mean, this is a snapshot of 4 years sitting here in May, June, July of 2021. I fully expect the next mayor, needs will change, issues will shift, the economy will move, and I would expect the next mayor and council to amend as needed. And then the last thing is, to your point, Mayor Peduto was elected to a 4-year term and took an oath of office to serve the city for 4 years. I can tell you, if you come over here right now, this floor side of the hall is booming and bustling with great staff working tirelessly for the taxpayers through the end of the year, regardless of electoral outcomes. And these priorities reflect where we see needs, from mental health crisis to affordable housing to small businesses to artists to city operations. And we'll do the same with the budget we present to council of where we see the next year for the city, and then allow the next mayor, of course, to amend as needed to meet his or her, I guess in this case likely his, but his or her desires to see the city operate the way they were elected to do so.
Yeah, I appreciate your comments, Chief Gilman. Thank you very much. Madam President, thank you for the time. I appreciate it.
Thank you. And I do want to say that I do think that I'm glad you're asking the questions. The purpose of this meeting is so that the public knows what we're doing. So I'm really glad that everybody's taking the time. It is going to take some time to get through this meeting, so I appreciate everyone's patience. With that said, any other members? Councilman Coghill.
Oh, thank you, Madam President. Chief Gilman, welcome.
I saw Councilman Wilson next. I'm sorry.
Okay. Chief Gilman, welcome. And first, I just want to start by saying, I was so pleased with our conversation the other day for you not quitting or, forgetting about important projects in my district. That's going to come to fruition after you're gone. So, you're a true professional. I've enjoyed working with you, and I know we still have a little more work to do here, but no, I really appreciate that. And on top of that, your entire department heads, some of which are on here today, have all been really professional and for the most part have been really good experiences. So they reflect you, and, again, you're a true professional. I appreciate you not giving up on the projects that we had started and showing them your attention. So with that said, I don't have much with this. There are a few things. I heard a lot about electric vehicles. I'm more concerned, at least for this winter, for 5-ton dump trucks and plows that run the old-fashioned way, at least for my own comfort level. The tobacco, the disaster we had over here. And I just want to be assured that before we go spending money on electric vehicles, that we have a full fleet. And I've noticed a lot of the trucks that were, in and around my neighborhood, one from like 1979, rusting. And I just want to make sure those vehicles are up to par come this winter, because, I don't want to face what I faced last year. And the employees as well, whether it's we have to fight to get them out there or we hire more. So if you could just speak to that for me real quick.
Sure, I'll take it in reverse order. In terms of the employees, as I noted, this funds not only 20 plus laborers back in public works, it also funds the seasonal laborers. And as soon as we start being able to allocate the parks tax, that should be another 40 to 50 laborers being hired by the city. So I would say it won't be by January, but by sometime next year, you likely will see 75 more laborers or so than we are. Well, 60 to 75 more laborers than where we are today, which should make and when I say laborers, I include drivers in that. I should be technical and careful in that. To the second point, I hear you loud and clear, and I will work with Kevin Paulus to get you an update with Brandon on our fleet and our projections. I would only note that There are, in some cases, restrictions on how we can spend ARP dollars in investing in climate resilience is a more eligible use than not. And so if you're able to use ARP to buy certain vehicles that then free up your ability to use your traditional ELA bond dollars for other vehicles, there is some swapping that makes sense. But I will follow up, Kevin, if you can take a note to have a conversation with Brandon on Public Works and get the councilman a good breakdown on where we are with vehicles.
We should have suggested that long ago. That
Is that somebody else talking? Is we all right? So the other thing on that, Chief Gilman, was the Public Works Division. We are planning to start that before the end of the year. Is that right?
Even if it means you and I doing it, the answer is yes. We absolutely 100% are. It actually goes before the Zoning Board of Adjustment on July 15th. So 9 days from now, they need to get a special exception for a continuation of a non-conforming use. I've already talked to the board and said, obviously no influence on how they vote, but whatever their vote is, if they could expedite a decision. If they vote no, we have to go back and redesign. If they vote yes, we can proceed, whatever it may be. I've just made it clear that we need an immediate decision so we can advance that as soon as we get through July 15th. And PLI is standing by ready to review the drawings as soon as the zoning board rules.
Okay, that's comforting. Real quickly, we touched base on this the other day when we talked, is the PWSA. You know, they had a rate increase, you know, right up to where Penn American is. Why is it that we are giving them money for lead replacement lines at this point?
So there's two reasons, or even three really. Number one, PWSA took a revenue hit, much like Parking Authority and the city and others did, and they received no direct funding from the ARP plan, unlike some of the county agencies like the Port Authority or the Airport Authority, who did receive.
Yeah, can I give 2 minutes?
Okay, I didn't know if I should stop. So some of the county agencies did receive direct. We did not. None of our agencies did. So we had to fund that. So there is a revenue loss there, number one. Number two, we want the lead out of the water. Anything we can do to get it out faster, we want to spend our dollars on. And number three, and again, this gets very in the weeds, which I apologize to the public for. Water infrastructure is a directly allowed allocation of the American Rescue Plan. Many of the stuff that people are talking about wanting to see, you and I talked about demo, and I've already asked Kevin to start to look at that and follow up with you. Demo is not an allowed use, so that would have to fall under the lost revenue category. That is, the city would have done this, but for COVID, lost revenue, we can do it. That's how we can do something like demo, but we can't use, we're capped on our lost revenue. So being able to fund things like water infrastructure actually gets the extra bonus of being its own legal category that doesn't all fall under lost revenue.
Okay, and I understand that, but you know, and I know you know what's probably coming next from me is that I could point to many things in the city that our taxpayer dollars go to that my district doesn't quite receive a benefit from. And I am fine with that because there are needs in other parts of town that I see more important than my part of town. So I'm always in favor of voting for things that I feel are citywide issues that don't quite come back to the 4th district. And this is why with PWSA, this kind of gnaws at me because, you know, we don't have PWSA. We rely on Penn American, and when we have to replace our lead lines, our rates go up. And, you know, so I guess what I'm saying is we have other needs over here, but is it fair in your opinion, where if we have $20 million going to PWSA that we could somehow, however we shift or move money to go towards problems that I have, real problems that I have in the way of infrastructure? You know, PWSA's infrastructure, and I understand it's got to be under the water, you know, eligibility type things. But so it's hard for me to explain, you know, when we're putting 20 million into PWSA, a division I have a hard time giving money to be honest with you. But on top of that, you know, that it means nothing in the way of services coming back to the 4th district. Can you help me get over that?
Sure. No, probably not. But what I can say is, you know, we took a very long look at a huge amount of need in the city. I mean, I could easily come to you with $1 billion spending plan and still not do everything all of us would want to see. And had to make tough decisions that we thought had the greatest impact citywide. There were specific things for your district, like Broadway Avenue, that we talked about, or, though it's physically not in your district, Division 4, and certainly priorities you had expressed, and tried to look at those top priorities for certain council districts, but also through an equity lens of recognizing there are parts of the city that haven't seen the investment from the private sector that others have seen, or there are parts of the city with greater levels of blight remediation, higher levels of unemployment, lack of government infrastructure, and try to balance those. I certainly hear and understand your point on PWSA and your residents not even receiving their services at all, and heard you loud and clear on the demo, and we're looking to see if we can make some of those changes to get you some of those additional dollars in a way that complies with the plan.
Yep. And I'll tell you, you've been very good with me, and, we've worked very well together on those bigger infrastructure type of needs that I feel I have, and again, this is just one more way where I feel like, well, you know what, I got 1,000 places I could put that money, whatever the percentage is, $2 million, we could, just say off the top of our heads, but anyway, so it's hard for me to support that, but we'll talk further offline on that. I won't belabor that. The other thing is the land bank, the land bank, I was like, what are we, so here's the thing, right? Just tell me how that $10 million is going to be used in order to make that successful. In what way? You know what I mean? Are we hiring super knowledgeable people with that money? What are we doing with the money?
Lindsay, why don't you jump in?
Yeah, thank you. I was going to say about the land bank, this funding will particularly be for acquisition and rehab. And so for the land bank in particular, as I'm sure all of you know, looking at some of the blighted areas within your districts, it is very expensive sometimes to get the liens and such off of these properties. What the land bank does, the structure overall will be to remove any monies owed from the 3 taxing bodies. We are the closest we've ever been since the land bank's origin of making sure that agreement between ourselves, the county, and the school district is signed. And we've been working very closely with the new management at the land bank as well as with the land bank board to move forward with that signed agreement. The money that the land bank will be using will be to, again, purchase, but also stabilize a lot of these places. For our structured parcels, we don't want to sell land that will be a burden to residents. So even though they may be interested in purchasing said lot and they've been looking at it forever, it's been a blight on the neighborhood, it makes sense to get it off of kind of public ownership back into the tax rolls. That person may not be able to rehab that house by themselves. I think what's really important about funding the land bank at this time, in conjunction with some of the other programs we talked about, is layering. We want to make sure that when it comes to moving a blighted parcel to a parcel that's back on the tax rolls and has a first-time home buyer in it, that we're able to use as many different sources of funding as possible. So having the land bank being able to kind of recycle that land, getting the liens off of it, acquiring it, going to the URA for possible additional rehab funding, working with some of our partner organizations to make sure that people are ready for these opportunities. The land bank is a critical step in making sure that, again, we're using our resources wisely and that we're able to utilize this tool that moves in a way that the city can't move, nor can the URA.
Mm-hmm. And I'll tell you, the truth is, I would feel a lot more comfortable with that money if I were on that board. I think, I can bring a lot to the table there. And Lindsay, what I hear you saying is that most of that money will be used to acquire properties that have tax liens on them. Is that right?
Yes.
So we'll make it square with the school district and the county, and then it will fall into our hands, and we're going to acquire as many. The land bank will be acquiring as many properties as they can. Ones of the 17,000 or so that we have. Is that correct?
Yeah, so at its very basic core, what the land bank has the power to do, which the city nor the URA can, is to basically have an agreement that would forgive any taxes owed on that property, but you still need to purchase the property outright. And so that would be the acquisition cost that we're talking about. When we've talked about, what's next for the land bank, I think that there's a lot of opportunity, and I believe you. And I've talked about this, Councilman, but how do we include our trades into this work? So if there are opportunities for trades folks who might need to apprentice on a house where they have to either build up the siding or what have you, that they can use our land bank properties, not just in a way that again brings that person to a home ownership opportunity, but also includes a workforce component to it. But again, it's very basic core. With the $10 million, we'll be able to acquire lands and we'll be able to move parcels faster through our process. If we're kind of doing it a one by one way, it actually kind of defeats the I don't want to say powers, but it defeats some of the privileges that the land bank has by being able to large batch title clearing, which you can't do as a city entity or a URA entity. But yes, overall, it will be for acquisition costs.
Care to give me a percentage on that 10 million as to what will be going towards acquiring properties?
I wouldn't be able, unfortunately, give you a percentage right now. I will say though, if the concern is staffing, the ARP funding, only a smaller percentage can go to like paying for people to do the work. And so I'm happy to come back to you with a better idea of what that breakdown would be, staffing versus operational dollars. But we're also at a place now, finally, at the land bank that we're staffed up in a way that's more comfortable than we were, 3 years ago when it was, a piece of my job and like a quarter of somebody else's job. We have actual dedicated staffers to this. So the staffing capacity isn't as much as of a hurdle anymore.
Okay, that's good. I'm all for acquiring properties, whether they just sit there. If we have a structure on them, we take it down if it's, unrehabable. However, I think we have to be very careful with trying to rehab structures that we have and throwing money into something that, just is not worth it. So I fear that a little bit. I think I see that in the Affordable Housing Act that we have with the $10 million comes there a year. And I won't get into all the details there, but I feel like we're kind of acting in the same way with the land bank as to what they do. But okay, I just need a better comfort level with the land bank and the PWSA. And we could talk offline on that. I don't want to eat up too much time, but thanks again. All the directors, you guys have been great. Dan, always, thanks for being there for me.
Thank you, Councilman. And now we have Councilman Bobby Wilson.
Thank you, Madam President, and
Thank you.
thank you, Chief Gilman and your administration for coming today. And it's really has been a lot of good facts that we've been talking about these allocations. I had some questions that are just about the whole 335 million just in general, and how we calculated lost revenue. You said there was a tool that the ARP provided, because I'm looking at the line in the city operating budget for the to prevent the elimination of city employees, and how that continues on for 4 years and actually increases in like the third year. Yes, the fourth year. And so I was curious as to, does that mean, well, first off, there's two parts. One is, does the 25 million prevent us from the 600 person layoff this year? And does that mean that every year we will be at the same risk of losing employees?
So to answer your question and to be very clear, yes, this plan will make it so layoffs are not on the table or something facing the city of Pittsburgh over the 4 years of this plan, given current economic conditions. That is what we address as we avoid the need for layoffs in the city. Into the formulas, Kevin or Patrick, if you want to jump in with the percentage formulas from the ARP rule.
Sure. Per the ARP guidance, the revenue calculation was based on the last full prior year prior to the pandemic. So that is 2019. We use that as the base year. Per the Treasury guidelines, they stipulated a growth percentage rate of 4.1% to grow and compound 2019 as the base year, so that you have an idea of what the revenue would have been had it not been for the pandemic. And then, of course, we compare that to our actual revenue calculation. So like Chief Gilman alluded to much earlier on, this is going to be a working plan because we cannot capture the lost revenue dollar amount until our revenue collections for that year are finalized, right? So right now, when you look at the lost revenue category, we have amounts in there based on our revenue projections on where we think our revenues as a city are going to end up. The delta of that is what we are able to capture. But as we move year over year is really when we're going to go back and say, okay, this is where we ended up. This is how it compares to that revenue formula. And thus, this is how much we can put in that lost revenue category bucket.
All right, thank you. Now, throughout this pandemic, I've heard that we essentially spent most of the rainy day fund. Do these funds allow us to put that in a line item to restore that fund?
No, they do not. Per the Treasury guidelines, we are not allowed to capture lost revenue and deposit that back into just our general fund. Throughout the pandemic, we depleted our rainy day fund by about 50 million. Thankfully, we had a very hefty general fund balance, so we did not have to lay anyone off during 2020. Although we did know that at some point in 2021, we were going to have to do that if these funds did not come, which is how that workforce reduction was worked into the budget. And to answer your earlier question, Councilman, the reason that number graduates every year is just because of the benefit costs and wage increases per CBAs that happen year over year. So it's, $25 million in this year isn't the same $25 million in 4 years. We have CBA raises, healthcare and benefit increases go up, pension increases go up. So that is why it's graduated throughout the plan.
Okay, thank you. So in terms of restoring a fund, like any bond rating, we want to see revenue, these entities that would, supply us with bonds, and we would enter into those agreements, and they keep our rating. What would be the plan for that? Will we see that in the next budget? I mean, in the fall.
The only thing I would touch, Council, is this is, and I know they mix together, talking about the ARP plan, but for the public's sake, we did introduce entire reopening of the city budget, and there are other moves that are done through that process based off actuals of spending in line items, which again, actually, some of the media inquiries have been, why are we talking about 4 years and 5 years when we're not going to be in office? And the answer is, by city law, we have to. To avoid Act 47 ever happening again, the city doesn't look at a 1-year projection because that gets us into the mess that we are in. So for opening the budget, we have to show you what this does over the 5 years. And through that reopener, plus what will come to you with the budget this fall, we hope that you will find, and obviously that's the council's most important job, that we're showing you a budget that's fiscally responsible and puts the city back in solid footing, not only as the responsible thing to do, but what's mandated again by council post Act 47 with the rules on spending and saving, so that we never end up back in Act 47 again.
Okay, all right, thanks. I believe that answers a lot of that about the, globally what this money does. I had a question about the 3% wage increase. When would that take effect for city employees?
Kevin, correct me if I say this wrong, please, but it would take effect upon council passage and mayor's signature, but this number is a retroactive number. So we would actually make a lump sum payment to employees for what they would have earned this year. It wouldn't just be going forward from day of effective date. Is that correct, Kevin?
Yeah, so we would have to work closely with our payroll team. The way this would be administered is much like a union CBA whenever they go into like status quo for 3 months until a new agreement is reached. If whatever time payroll can finalize the calculations and administer a lump sum retroactive payment, that would be given to all of the non-union employees. And then from that pay period there on out for the remaining of 2021, those non-union hourly rates would be increased by that 3% so that the paychecks moving forward that would then be reflected of that increase.
Okay. All right, thank you for that. I had a question about the land maintenance, the line item. It's 1.5 million over each year. This is in addition to the our current efforts to solve issues in terms of vacant properties.
Correct. This would be on top of the existing allocation through the 3TB.
So we'll be able to do more properties essentially.
Correct.
Okay. All right. That's an easy one. I had a question about the Davis Avenue Bridge. Is that I see that it's funded in the third year. Does that mean that that $2 million for capital expense, that would be for the actual to build it, like that, meaning that we could use design money until we get the design and all the studies to then actually go and build the bridge?
Correct. I'll make 2 points. Yes, we have the money for design and engineering now. And in fact, I was going to call you later. We've issued the ITQ for design. It's now been awarded. So the full design of the bridge is ongoing as of the other day. By the time we design, engineer, go to bid, get the contract, start work, and actually owe a payment, that's when we think we'll really be kind of quote unquote in the ground. And I would note too, even if we could, which we never could, but hypothetically, even if we could use all this money up front, we can't do that from a budgetary perspective. Number two, one, we get checks in 2 different years, but also by the law of how we do it and how much money the city can bring in while keeping the right balances of revenues versus expenditures, we need to spread this out over the years. So Davis Avenue Bridge is a great one to not show the money in year one if we're not going to spend it in year one anyways. It just takes up room from a project that we could deliver immediately to someone in need.
Okay, thanks. And we all hope that the price of lumber goes down by that time. I think for all of these projects. And could you explain the facility upgrades? Because I see, we have capital for, I'm sorry, not facility upgrades, for the tech upgrades. So I see that some of these are in the first year. I'm just trying to understand how, I see for instance, Cali Rec Center, there's the funding across the 4 years, and it also has tech upgrades. And what does the tech upgrades mean?
Correct. So again, the first number, which is often the bigger number, is the physical upgrades to the building. Sometimes in the case of Cowley or Jefferson, it's a whole new, Cowley, we're obviously demoing and building an entire new building. Same thing at Robert E. Williams. In other cases, we're just making renovations to the building. The tech line item is the actual work, basically IMP would do to get the rec to tech ready with the right wiring and build out. And the reason it's split out is, again, the tech, the broadband is a legally allowable use of the ARP funds. So we're able to put that in a different category than the facility upgrade. So that's the need to list it twice. And the reason they're in different years, again, we need to spread it out over 4 for budgetary purposes. And for something like Cowley that needs to be designed, engineered, and built, it's going to take a while before it's ready for the wiring versus, say, McKinley that, fixed the roof and we could be ready to put in the wiring still this year. So we had to phase it both for budgetary reasons and reality of when Public Works would be ready with the facility.
And if I could add to that, throughout the creation of this plan, we worked very closely with DPW and IMP to discuss, what the phasing of that looks like. So Assistant Director Hornstein, Phil Savino from IMP, were great partners in explaining, not only just how much we need for those upgrades, but when it would be a realistic timeline of when those upgrades could actually be implemented. And a lot of those times, it does time well with construction, right? Because like Chief Gilman said, while you're doing the full rehab of the building, the tech upgrades could be like the last finishing touches after the physical upgrades.
Thank you for that. I had a question about the community land trust, and there's $5 million. Will that be distributed based on applications, just like we see with neighborhood economic development funds? Like ones, would this just be community land trusts all across the city that are already up and running, or is this some other effort?
This would be allocated by the URA. So we would be giving the money to the URA. They would create program application guidelines for CLTs to apply for matching funds to close the gap on funding for their project.
Okay. All right, thanks. I'll follow up with them. 1 second, I just want to get my place here. I did have I wanted to make I wanted to commend the administration on their funding for the AHM program. It's in my district, as in, one of the 3 zones. I have it in zone 1. And this is the AHN's Urban Poverty and Homelessness outreach team. And me and my office, we work closely with this entity, and it's just critical for helping individuals that are around, in and around the north side and across the city. I'm looking forward to, the full cooperation of Zone 1 to, continue to implement the code response. And, funding like this is, what's going to change lives in terms of people that are experiencing homelessness and people that are experiencing substance use disorder, and really fill the gap of what services we see that aren't being implemented. So this is my little plug to kind of cheer on the funding of programs like this, and how, as we move forward as a city, there will be other initiatives, and looking forward to them partnering with this initiative. I've been wondering for a long time why it's so critical that we fund this outside the city. But why don't we just include this in a city department? And I think a major reason is, the primary reason is that we actually, when we partner with a health system, we're able to get access to they're able to get access to records immediately and actually help people in place as soon as when they arrive on the situation or whenever they're working through an issue. So it's, we don't have that ability on the city side. And, further sharing information with different health systems. So for instance, if we have access to AHN, we also need access to UPMC records. We also need access to, I'm sorry, I keep on saying AHN, the outreach team, needs access to all these records. So looking forward to efforts to seamlessly get the sharing of records and data so that we can further help individuals. Lastly, I just wanted to ask, so that wasn't a question, that was just my own little plug. But lastly, I wanted to ask, what is left out of this funding? So based on, essentially I talked about the, having a savings account that we're missing out on now. But really, there were guidelines with this. What is, Chief, in your own, working through these funds, what do you see as being, some of the shortfalls of what we can fund here?
I mean, that's a fair but a tough question. I mean, I would say obviously we put forward what we believe is the best plan for consideration. So there's nothing I would say is missing in terms of, no one overruled us and cut something out in terms of what we presented to council. As I noted, I could spend, $1 billion tomorrow. There are numerous infrastructure projects. There are so many more developments that saw increased construction costs that have gaps still in financing for affordable housing development around the city. There's so much more that could be done with vacant land, with land recycling, food access. There are just so many issues, of course, in our communities. More small business loan programs, venues and stages, rental assistance. I mean, and we did a lot of those through the CARES Act and the COVID CV funding. So we're trying to touch in different areas. But COVID, was obviously had a devastating impact on economic conditions across the country, created huge gaps in construction projects, and we are a city with tremendous infrastructure needs and economic development needs. So I could come up with 50 more projects, but I wouldn't want to see money taken away from anything we're proposing, because we think we hit the right areas with this plan.
All right, great. Yeah, I just wanted to try to understand if there were any real constraints that were tied to this funding. What I'm looking at in terms of the allocations, I really like to see the investments that are being made and the allocations that are being put forward here. So I appreciate everything that you and your team worked on and were able to present. So thank you for your time, and I will I'll give my time to someone else. Thanks for answering all the questions.
Thank you, Councilman. And now we'll move on to Councilwoman Gross, who's been waiting patiently, and then Councilwoman Strasburger. I know you've been waiting also.
Thank you, Madam President. I appreciate it. I want to acknowledge, first of all, that this is getting at 3 o'clock here. So I realize we've all been here a while. But I have lots and lots of notes in front of me. So I want to appreciate everyone from the administration kind of helping us get a lot more detail about the plan that you have proposed. I do want to address something that a couple members have asked about, which is about this 4-year allocation. And Councilman Strauss talked. Somebody, can you hear that? I've heard something weird. That Councilman Kraus talked about the fact that you've been in office through COVID as a reason to do a 4-year allocation. But I had my staff look through our 15 benchmark cities, and none of the 15 benchmark cities have done a 4-year allocation. 12 of them have done, 1 year or partial allocations, and they also have been in office during COVID. So I don't think that is really either the concern nor the answer. The concern, and what we've also seen across the 15 cities, is that there's much more robust public conversation. And so this conversation is our first public conversation. There were 3 council members in the task force that helped the administration put this proposal forward. Most of us saw it on the same day that it was released to the public. We do have the 2 public hearings coming up, but what other cities are doing, like Philadelphia has been having public hearings since March, even though none of us got the funds until late May. We have cities like Minneapolis allocating, I think their mayor just allocated 1/3 of their total $500 million, maybe less, 15%, I think, an $80 million allocation as to get money out the door, right? That is the thing that we're concerned about. We really do want to get money out the door for those immediate needs, the pain that people are having out there now that these funds can help address. And yet that's only 15% of Minneapolis's total award of $500 million. So we're going kind of through these cities, and what I see is that rather than a wish list of projects that a city has talked about for 8 years, like the land bank, which is one of my favorite topics as well, right? I share that and the potential for the future city growth, and for solving long-standing, decades-long entrenched problems like abandoned properties the city has. I think we need to hear from our citizens whether they want these dollars to go to finally unsticking the failed, land bank, which I think has, we really need to do. We really need to do good work with the land bank. But is that what our public wants to do with these dollars right now? And so I see there being kind of 2 issues in front of council. Firstly, kind of looking at the suggestions and ideas. There's a lot of rows with a lot of ideas, and deciding kind of which of those to prioritize, and that are the ones that we need to move now. And then there are others that are probably worth a really good conversation that maybe our public will fully support the allocation of. But I think they deserve the time to digest that, and not to say to tie it up for 4 years, and not to say, as I think Chief Gilman said, do nothing now, and no one's talking about doing nothing. But that there's two things, the sets of things where there's especially down at the bottom of your spreadsheet, and I encourage everyone to pull up the legislation built, I think 2021-1652 in our Legistar system at the city website, and see that the lower half of it really is about those capital projects, which we are talking about, great projects around rec centers, mainly in city neighborhoods. But then these kind of transfers, millions of dollars transferred to the Urban Redevelopment Authority, and millions transferred to the land bank, millions transferred to PWSA. It seems to me that it's changed somewhat. No, there isn't. It's the same as the bill that was up last week. $10 million to PWSA in year one is something to chew on, and then $10 million to PWSA in year two is something to chew on. Do we want to do those transfers at all? Does the public support that money? And then I think the second area of conversation is whether those belong in the first column. So I think Chief Gilman pointed out that a lot of these projects are spread out over the 4 years. Even if we all support this project, the installments could be spread out over 4 years. And so it looks to me like they're front loaded. Some of these really big capital transfers that add up to nearly a third, I think, of the total award. If we were to vote yes on this allocation today, firstly, we wouldn't have the public input. And then secondly, we really would be committing upfront a lot of funds. And I'm afraid that if this council voted, for example, the PWSA transfer, or approves this spreadsheet, that the PWSA transfers could happen this month. So, it takes a cooperative agreement, like why is it in the year 2021? Certainly they're not going to spend down $10 million in lead water service replacements in 2021. I know, because I voted on a lot of rate increases, and I voted on a lot of borrowing at PWSA, that there is a big capital stack of capital funding for lead line replacements. We could probably hear from PWSA about where they are in spending those down. I know that they are now happening along the water main replacements, which are long overdue, which is great. But that's just one example. So, I think a similar public conversation needs to happen about which of the rows in the spreadsheet the public supports, and when they, might. So if they do support them, when they need to happen. So what we've learned, I think all of us, is that when we make these kinds of very large, impactful decisions without robust public conversation, the public is rightfully angry with us. So this is the beginning of that conversation, and I think it's really good that we take a lot of time and take a lot of detail on the longer term projects that are, again, long-standing issues. They aren't less about immediate needs and more about projects that didn't get done yet. I just wanted to make sure I said that. Similarly, across the 15 different benchmark cities, and these are the same ones that we always compare ourselves to in Pittsburgh Quarterly and in the media, we just kind of like pulled those out because they're similarly sized cities. They got the same kind of ARP awards based on the poverty in the city and this kind of CDBG type calculations that the federal government did. We also see that most of our comparison cities spend a substantial amount of their first partial allocations on eviction diversion, on housing, on childcare, community assistance, food insecurity, and direct support. So I really want to ask both Chief Pell and Chief Gilman what I think I heard about the GBI funding, which is that I thought I heard you say that we can't make those direct payments. And in fact, my staff says that St. Louis, Seattle, and Boston are all doing direct cash payments with the ARPA funds. So why can't we do direct cash payments with the ARPA funds?
Pennsylvania state law prohibits cities from doing it, which is the very reason we put the Housing Opportunity Fund and similar programs at the URA at different times, for the same reason we can't do rental assistance direct through the city. We do that through the URA, and now, of course, in partnership with Action Housing, et cetera. That's why they go through the URA. It's prohibited by Pennsylvania law.
If someone could explain that a little more clearly. So since the source of funds is ARPA funds, and the source of funds isn't your kind of annual property tax, and I can look up the state law myself and read it, but I don't have it in front of me, so I'm going to summarize it. So the state law specifies that the city just may not do it regardless of the source of funds.
It's a very good question, Councilman. Let me talk to law and try to get you a good answer. I understand the distinction you're making on the source, and I wouldn't want to try to play lawyer here. So it's a good question that we'll work to get you a good answer on.
Okay, so that's an open question. We'll just leave for today that, in fact, if other cities like Seattle, St. Louis, and Boston are using ARPA funds to do direct cash payments, are they using third parties the way you're suggesting, or are they not? Is it the state laws prohibit the city from doing it with anybody's funds, or does the state law just prohibit it for the kind of municipal revenue sources? I think I'd appreciate that. I also want to say that I'm very happy to see the top half of the spreadsheet, which is about the city operating funds. And I really appreciate Chief Gilman, you going through the detail at the top of this meeting about the kinds of positions that are being replaced in the operating budget. They're either added back or added and swapped out, I think is the phrasing that you used. They are dearly needed. We're really happy to see the new positions in DPW, to see the positions in Parks and Rec, to even see the positions in finance, certainly positions in the law department. I appreciate that. And that we are, of course, doing the 3% wage increase for non-union positions. I heartily support that increase. And of course, the top line, eliminating the anticipated workforce reduction of July 1st is critical, but it's July 6th, isn't it? So how did we, does someone want to explain that? I think that's a confusing point to people. So if we pass this, we'll avoid the cuts that were to happen on July 1st that didn't happen. So how have we been paying those paychecks for the last 6 days? Maybe Director Paulus, if you just want to clarify what have we been doing?
Sure. Those paychecks have been being paid from our general fund balance. So being that we have reserves available, now knowing that the funds were here and that a plan was proposed in front of City Council and would be voted on and discussed, we could avoid those layoffs in the interim until a plan is passed. These funds would make the operating budget whole for those paychecks.
Wonderful. So we have not done the July 1st eliminations, and we won't, which is fantastic. When I see the word restoration, I want to ask specifically, are those restoring the January 1st cuts? Because there were cuts on January 1st at the beginning of 2021, because so many of there was a citywide hiring freeze. And many departments lost people in the course of 2020 and were not able to replace those people. Those positions all got eliminated on January 1st. So I remember specifically feeling the pain with PLI because my department has especially so many small businesses that were not able to get the response that they needed from PLI because the staffing levels were down as of January 1st. And I did try to replace them in December and failed. So could you speak to that? Were those the January 1st positions replaced?
This plan restores 71% of the January 1st eliminations.
How can I get, and I'm assuming it's not here at 318 on live TV, but how do I get which of those positions were replaced and which were not?
We can certainly email that to council easily.
Great, I'm glad I asked. I am particularly, I didn't hear PLI being talked about, and I am particularly concerned about the capacity at PLI. I'll jump back down to the bottom of the spreadsheet, back to the lead. The dollar allocation that you have in here for lead line replacements, I think now has kind of mutated, rightfully so, into also not being just about water line replacements, but also about lead paint remediation. And there are many of us on council that have been working with the Lead Safe Allegheny and Women for a Healthy Environment for years now, in fact. And even before the formation of the Allegheny County Task Force, we've been working on how to get PLI to do lead inspections. And we were waiting for the rental registry, and then we have been not waiting for the rental registry, and we just haven't been doing it. We know that that is the main cause of lead poisoning in the city of Pittsburgh. We know that children in the city of Pittsburgh are being lead poisoned. You can see the map of blood lead level results at the CMU Create Labs mapping of this kind of dynamic social data on their website. We're deeply concerned about that. It's a very important issue for our children, our families, and also all of us in the city, right? We cannot have a successful city when we're allowing our children to be poisoned by lead. So I heartily applaud working with Women for a Healthy Environment, but we've been told that it's just 4 inspectors. 4 inspectors at PLI and we could get started. And 4 inspectors at PLI costs less than $400,000 a year. So, but that we just couldn't budget for that and wouldn't budget for that. So I would like to see that this initiative to remediate lead paint across the city include 4 inspectors at PLI, because that's what we've been told is how we get started. And so we can either see that up at the top in the operating budget, or we can see it down in the bottom here when you kind of, I think we'll change that row 87. We're already talking about it here in this post agenda so that it's not just a check to PWSA, but it's actually going to the leading cause of lead poisoning of our children, which is lead paint. And there's a lot more that we can do to make sure that homes are remediated, to make sure that schools are remediated, to make sure that childcare facilities are remediated. And I know I've been talking to the RA about this now for the 2 years that we've been talking about how they can best support childcare facilities. So I do appreciate that. And I think I connected them with Women for a Healthy Environment early in 2020 when we were talking about those programs. I do want to just ask an open-ended question. I don't see any support for food insecurity. Why not?
Mostly in that we put significant amount of money from COVID and COVID cares, the 2 different federal packages we received, into significant food insecurity issues, whether that was a number of our food pantries, support for the food bank, support for 412 Food Rescue, and their restaurant initiative. Some of those still have dollars left in them that hadn't been spent yet, and some don't. It depends on which line. And so as we were going through areas that hadn't seen financial support and had been most hit, this was the list we came up with. Certainly food insecurity remains a tremendous need. everywhere in the country and addressing food desert and other things. And as always, we're open to suggestions on specific programs or initiatives that have a gap that could use support of these dollars that meet the requirements.
Can we get numbers filled in then also, if once you email me back about the number of positions that haven't been filled back in? Could you also email me about the dollars left? There is food insecurity. This is a federal package of 335 million, I think is our final number, to alleviate the impacts of COVID. We still have people who need our support, and we want to make sure those dollars are there. And I think it even would be, I think would serve all of us and the public to have more conversation about whether those programs were sufficient, right? So even if they still have dollars in them, not every program reaches every person, right? And there are different kinds of needs out there. And I think it's time for a kind of roundup and an update about, you know, who's being reached. I want to applaud once again Parks and Rec, especially for, I think the update now is nearly 1 million meals that they have moved, over 1 million. Thank you, Tufel and Rich Phillips. Over 1 million that they pulled together from packaged meals from the school system, from the education funding, right? So we didn't have to even pay for those meals, and then packaged meals from the senior funding, the Area Agency on Aging, the kind of state funded, right? And so our staffing just moved the meals. I'm really, really encouraged by that response. And I think I said in December when he updated us last, how do we do everybody? You know, how do we do more? Because there's just, we don't, you can't do anything, right? When you're hungry, your kids are hungry, right? And certainly if you're a kid in our school system, we need to make sure they're getting that support. We know our summer programming is down, and I'm concerned about that. So I really appreciate that Parks and Rec went proactively set up more distributions and not, you know, and just really retooled their entire delivery system. And so I think we and the council and the public needs an update there. So this is the opportunity to do more and to do better right now with these funds. So I would like to definitely see that we can do more about that. Every year, even in the before times, we scramble in our CDBG allocations, our federal funds that are flexible, to add more money to our hunger programs, to the food bank, to Just Harvest. Every year, we try to dig up just a few more $1,000, 10,000 more here, 10,000 more there. This is the pot of money that we can use to make sure our city residents are getting food on the table. And not really, honestly, and to make it easier for them to put the food on the table, right? And to not wait all day in food bank lines, right? Let's make it so it's not stressful for them to have food on the table. I think I would love to hear if there's any way that we can do better, and then fund that once we figure that out. If there's a way we can do better. And so I want to make sure that we make the space to do that. I know that we have an entire nonprofit in the city of Pittsburgh that is the Food Policy Council that I believe has 100 members, member organizations. So there are 100 different organizations out there. And instead of every year us having to pick some over the other ones or scrape up a couple extra thousand, I believe that we could set this up as a pool that is specified just for food insecurity. And a year and a half ago, when we were all worried about supply chains, everything from toilet paper to refrigerators to actual food items, we were talking about how to supply more food in the city. We did start agricultural programs. I piloted some in my own district. We have other community farms that are set up in other council districts, funded a variety of different methods. This is a time where we can, I think, take a look and see where there is gaps, either in the distribution of those sites or in the support that they need. And again, with these kinds of flexibility of funds, the things we normally can't do, other cities are doing. And I think we should look hard at what these funds allow us to do that we normally can't do. I think I'm just gonna wrap up by saying, what I see here are some really immediate needs. But I also see some things that are just kind of long-term, entrenched, problems that maybe we have the opportunity here to unstick, but may not be the things that are the urgent needs. And I'd like to hear from the public about their prioritizations, because we shouldn't assume that they're the same as 7 years ago. And some of these things we started talking about 7 years ago, and I think it's time to revisit, and just have the public conversation, and hopefully the public will agree. Like I said, I've definitely had some favorite topics like the land bank. I would love to see, and I think it's really something that will strengthen the city in the long run. But before I would support a year one allocation, I really think I need to hear that from the public as well. So some of these rows I think need to change, and then some of the columns that look to me front loaded to where we're trying to lock in 4 years of allocations in the first 3 months of a 4-year period. And other cities that we compare ourselves to are not doing it that way, and I think they're doing a much better job at the public conversation. But thank you. I'm going to stop there because now it's 3:30. Appreciate it. Madam President?
Thank you, Councilwoman. I'll just say that the public conversation is being driven by council, and that we do plan on having hearings on a Saturday, which we typically don't have, and an evening, which we typically don't have. And members are out there talking every day to their constituency. So we are getting some feedback already. With that said, Councilwoman Strasburger, and then I'll go after you. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you all for the time that you've taken today with us. My questions are a little bit technical in nature. I just think around the public and council understanding how this all fits together. Wondering if it's possible to provide us or provide publicly with sort of, given the restrictions for each type of fund, how the line items were allocated. Is that possible, or is it too complex to be able to do that by year and by line item? Just so we better understand, like, this is why we kind of split it up this way, because there are restrictions and very kind of specific rules around it.
I'm not sure there's one document to provide that. I mean, we certainly can share with council the links to the ARP rules. There, I don't remember, someone can jump in. Many pages, dozens, if not hundreds. There are some good executive summaries out there that we can share with council that break down the rules that were promulgated for this. Beyond that, it really is the intersection of the ARP rules with city code. I'm not looking to go back, but on Councilwoman Gross's comments, the other cities, and I'm happy to look at what some of them did, we have to do longer term budgeting by city code. So we have, that doesn't change some of her points, which are valid and understood. But for us, the need to keep certain percent in balance are things that city council put into code post Act 47 as part of our recovery. So it's not, some of it is ARP spending rules. Some of it is for us how to balance the budgets over 4 years and provide to city council a balanced budget. Things like adding all the first line item, there's the first chunk, which is the city operations side. That alone is 130-ish million. We have to show that over the entire 4 years by city code. So it's a little bit complicated maybe to find one document, but we certainly can start by getting to you the rules of the ARP, if that helps to show some of the areas that are specifically recognized and what may or may not be done.
Okay, and if we have questions, we can say, obviously why that, ask the question, why this spending? How are you working with the rules and the restrictions in place to be able to accomplish what you'd like? Along those lines, though, is it fair to divide the spending into what I've heard described as discretionary versus non-discretionary? Is that a different differentiation, or is that not a differentiation in your mind? Is that not a thing?
I'm not sure, I apologize, I'm not sure I understand the question about what's discretion. I mean, anything here is discretionary. There's nothing that we must do. Obviously, we wanted to avoid layoffs. That was step one. I wouldn't say that required, but we thought it was ethically and morally required, if not, as beyond government operations. So, but it is all discretionary, generally speaking. There was not a direction that you must spend X percent of your dollars on this issue first, or anything like that from the federal government.
Okay. Thank you. And then moving forward, I mean, I'm trying to understand how this will, how when the public or when we as council members look at this in the future, how this merges with future budgets. So will it be as simple as the source of income or the source of revenue will be a separate line item or a separate category? So like we see, bond, pay-go, CDBG, there'll be one that's just ARP. Is that how it'll look? So we'll be able to differentiate between what was allocated this year for 2024 in the 2024 budget from non-ARP dollars. Does my question make sense? Like, we'll be able, in the future, will we as council be able to differentiate between and follow where the money goes?
It makes perfect sense, but I'll let the budget director answer.
That's a very good question, Councilwoman. The answer is yes. Per this proposed plan, there's a couple ways that money will move out. First of all, we have a trust fund set up that was passed through legislation a couple months ago to house these funds. That is the only thing, that is the only source of revenue, I'll call, going into that trust fund. It was very important to set that up to make sure that we had those segregated out, not only for reporting and compliance purposes, but also for transparency purposes. As far as anything going back into the operating budget, there will be a newly created like a revenue line, so we can track the money actually coming in onto the city books and treat it as revenue. And so you will clearly see that in year one, whatever that allocation going to the operating budget is, will be reflected in that line. And again, that is the only source of funding coming into that revenue line. For the capital budget to fund some of these proposed capital projects, there will be in each capital budget page, there's a chart that lists out bond, pay-go, other, and things like that. We are going to include an ARP line. So for those projects, and it will have its own page as well, so that you can clearly go to that page in our capital document, see what projects are funded with those dollars. So again, for the transparency, for the ease of a resident to understand the document. We understand that the budget documents are daunting things to understand, and we try to make them as simple as possible. Sometimes it works against us, but we want to make sure that we do that as clearly as possible. And then the third would be any money going out to another entity would go by way of a co-op, right? With PWSA, with the URA, things like that. That was part of the reason that the Meyer-Dussel contract that was in front of you all last week is so critical, because they also help us understand those rules and guidelines of the Treasury. I will mention that they're constantly changing. I think the latest round of frequently asked questions were just updated a week and a half ago. So we've had an interim rule for about 60 days, but they do tweak them, they do change them, they add things, they remove them. And so it's helpful to understand what those guidelines are. But on top of that, the Myers will also work with a law firm to create the co-ops so that we have those in place, so that we can clearly track those dollars, because we need to for compliance purposes. So I hope I answered your question clearly. You
did. No, that's very helpful. That's helpful to know that there'll be both the source of revenue and the separate page. Will there, in the case of non-compliance, we either don't comply because of some way of restricting the money that's spent, or we don't spend the money by 2024 that needs to be spent. What is the mechanism that actually, like, how is non-compliance dealt with? The money is taken back by the federal government? Like, what actually happens?
Yeah, so we would remit the unspent dollar amounts back to the federal government per the guidelines. The money in categories outside of the broadband water and sewer infrastructure need to be spent and out the door by 12/31/2024. That means checks cut for broadband in those three categories that I specifically called out. Those funds can be obligated, and we have the ability until 2026 to spend those as well. But along the way is 6 annual reports. There's an annual financial report, an annual performance report, and 4 quarterly financial reports that the city is going to have to file with the federal government as those benchmarks as we move through this plan to make sure that we are falling in compliance with expenditures that we have incurred and are looking to, spend the ARP funds on.
Got it. Okay, those are all the questions I had. Everyone else asked all the questions that I had, so benefit of going last. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilwoman Strasburger. And so I'm going to just ask a few things and make a few comments. I just want to first thank you all for being here and thank you for all your work. Lindsay, I got to see the work you do firsthand when we were doing a lot of the work with the hunger groups and making sure people in my district ate, and where those programs were pretty much non-existent, even though there are over 100 organizations and people involved in the hunger group. It was you who really helped me a lot. So I'll never forget that. So thank you very much for your work, and Chief of Staff Gilman, who really always got involved in a lot of the things that when we needed help. So thank you. Thank you all for all your work. And for preparing this and for working with Reverend and Councilman Laval and I on preparing this. And with that said, I do want to say, knowing that there'd be a new administration coming in, I've obviously already talked with some of the people who may be in office come next year. And we're willing to work with, whatever the needs are of the city of Pittsburgh and with whomever's in office at the time. And we've made that very clear. So with that said, these are the things that we know, talking and working with our constituents every day and out in the community and seeing the needs that we know that there's a great need for. I do have some issues with the PWSA stuff, because I will say that I have so many issues with the issues in Banksville regarding PWSA. So for me, that is going to be crucial. Key to me is if those projects are taken care of. I also don't want to give money out that is not going to be helpful to our constituents, especially when there are issues in my district, even though they are not served. The water does not come from PWSA. It comes from PA American. There are infrastructure issues with PWSA that need to be addressed. And so that's a conversation that I expect to continue with Chief of Staff Gilman and the mayor. And the Stevens School Building and the projects in my district, I'm very grateful for, because we usually don't see a lot of money in our district, and we really have been, especially under this administration. I've seen a lot, so I want to thank you for all that. But I do have a question about the land bank is also a concern for me. There were two things that I told you were concerned. It's the PWSA and it's the land bank. But I was asked the question about the basic income for Black women. Recently, it's my understanding the Supreme Court told the Biden administration they cannot spend money that way without, because it would be excluding other people. And so because it was designated for one group of people, that couldn't happen. How confident are you that this will withstand any kind of court or challenge, or any kind of any challenge at all? How confident are you that would be okay?
I don't think I'm the one to answer it. It's a legal question. We can talk to someone. Other cities are doing it, and I haven't seen a national challenge to other cities. But I don't know the answer to your question, Madam President. In terms of,
I'd like to get a little bit more information on that, because that was something that was asked of me, and I honestly didn't know the answer either. So I'd like to make sure I'm getting the appropriate answer for people. And with that, I will continue to say that my concerns still remain with the land bank and the PWSA. I do have some concerns about demo, but I think we need to get creative about how we do add more money into demo. But I want to say with the land bank, the thing that's making me calm down a little bit about adding the money to the land bank is since I've been there, I've said I don't want foundations controlling our land. I don't want our land to be controlled by public entities. And this is the first time you'll be putting public dollars into it and at this level. And so for that, it makes me feel a little bit more reassured that the public will still have control over their land. And to me, that's the most important part of the land bank, is that the public never lose control of what is their land and their property. So with that said, I'm feeling a little bit more confident that this might be the right decision in moving the land bank forward. And I do sit on the board of the land bank, and I am the one who's always asking questions and driving people crazy and doing all this thing. But it is because I want to make sure that the public remains totally in control of that, and it's not privatized in any way. And with that said, that's it for me. Is there anything further from members or Chief of Staff Gilman? Is there anything you'd like to add as closing comments?
No, I just want to thank council for their time. I think this was a great conversation. It's a unique and critical opportunity, honestly, in the history of our country, between this, the infrastructure bill, and having a federal government ready to really reinvest in people in our city, for the mayor and council to work together to develop the best plan and the best priorities for our city and our region. So appreciate the conversation and look forward to the ongoing dialogue in the coming week.
Thank you. Anything else from members before we wrap this up? I do want to say I want to thank our members, because it's not always easy asking questions of our colleagues and sitting here. And I do think that these are things that we do need to ask, and the public, they do want to know some of the things that we're doing. So I think that we're going to make sure that we reach out and have the hearing on a Saturday. The first hearing will be Saturday at 10 a.m. and you can call the clerk's office to register. And can we maybe, I'm going to ask if Kevin, if you could maybe, and Chief of Staff Gilman, put something together for the public so that we can keep it on our website, so people see like a little fact sheet. These are the categories. These are frequently asked questions, what we can and cannot spend money, something to let the public know before it even comes to public comment, so they know, so they know what they're asking is something that we can and cannot do. So that they're informed as well. And I'd really appreciate if we can put that on even our websites and on our social media sites. If you'd work with our clerk's office to do that. And
we'll work with you on that right away.
Thank you. Thank you. Can I have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
So moved.
In a second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Meeting's adjourned. Thank you, everyone.